Good evening. How is everyone doing? Yeah, so how many of you have been experiencing rapid growth in your organization and evolving to a virtual work environment? Have you felt the need to grow your company's cloud knowledge, and the need to improve your developers' productivity by connecting them to a sense of community? Hi, my name is Sesibhushan Somarautu. I'm the Senior Manager for AWS Knowledge Management.
And hi, my name is John Bell, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I'm the manager for the AWS Specialist Communities team. Today we're going to walk you through some tools, best practices, mechanisms, solutions to improve your productivity and scale and to adapt to change, to answer some of the questions that Ceci just asked. So today we're going to leverage a lot of what we've learned at AWS, a lot of what we've seen from you all to scale best practices and build these communities, as well as industry best practices that we can share. So let me talk through a little about what we're going to be discussing today. So I'm going to talk you through a number of common challenges and trends that we've observed for cloud builders as we've seen us grow in this rapidly evolving environment. Then to adapt to that, I'm going to talk about, or Ceci will talk about some best practices that we have learned from our experience at AWS and what we've seen in the industry to adapt to those challenges. Beyond that, I'll talk about how you can stitch all those together to build a knowledge network so you can solidify that and create structure so that you can go out and scale those more systematically. And then finally, we'll talk about some AWS knowledge scaling mechanisms that you all can utilize. So the technology landscape is changing rapidly. Organizations are challenged with equipping builders with the knowledge needed to adapt towards the shifting competitive landscape, where how we work, how we live, and consumer preferences are rapidly growing and evolving based on new capabilities and trends. Where knowledge of how to apply technologies, how to adapt to cultural nuances, how to think about and adapt to what your customer is going to want, maybe even before they know it, has become a key differentiator. So let me walk you through some common challenges that we can talk about that we've seen in this time. First of all, let's talk about the fast pace of innovation. Think of all the amazing products that you all build, where the knowledge your workforce needs to learn how to build those products is rapidly changing and evolving based on new technology and all of the change in what you have available. So I'm going to start with the example of AWS. AWS has been continuously expanding its services to support virtually any cloud workload, and now has more than 300 fully featured services. In addition to having the greatest breadth of services, AWS also has the deepest functionality of services. So now, within that, think about how have we been able to scale to keep up with that rapid pace of innovation, continue innovating while also growing the services we have. So you know, if you think about this evolution, it's gone really quickly, moving from data centers to EC2 to serverless architectures, and finally to generative AI, machine learning, and analytics for you to all look at how you can utilize the data that you're putting into the cloud. So I would tie this back to the training of AWS employees and how we need to make sure that our employees know how to adapt to all of these technologies in order to be those experts that you rely on or that you are working with. They need to stay sharp with all the trends and continue to evolve the breadth of knowledge, taking into account their individual career aspirations for when they want to go and have depth to work and partner with their peers. Second trend I'll talk about is virtualization. Businesses have been changing in recent years. The companies are all becoming increasingly global. We've had a number of health concerns, as I think you're all aware of, over the last 3 or 4 years. And cultural preferences to adapt to these global virtual work environments mean that you need to think of how you're going to reach your customer where they are. So how many of you and your customers have needed to significantly change how you work, how you share knowledge, and how you communicate with each other, accounting for this trend? Thankfully, technology continues to evolve, where we all need to think of how to foster a sense of collaboration in a hybrid and virtual environment. We can utilize this technology, but there are still all of the intangible and process-oriented components that go along with this as well. The next challenge I'm going to talk about is the knowledge gap. So with so much to grasp, that rapid pace of innovation I was talking about earlier, it's not possible to be a master in every technology. So I'm going to talk about an example of telecom today, where ever-expanding technology is growing in a number of ways, including private 5G, the evolution of 5G itself, connectivity solutions via wavelength, local zones, a number of different core technologies, billing technologies that stream this massive network together so that customers are able to more adaptively utilize telephony and the technology that's coming out of that. So how do we balance the aspirations for somebody to learn the breadth of all the different solutions that a telecom customer would need to understand in order for you to be talking about all the different use cases they may want? How would we anticipate that? And then how would we build depth in particular areas so that you can have a network to work with each other? So without simple collaborative mechanisms, this can be a real challenge. So consider the frustration, cost, and time that can be lost by not being able to find that knowledge. An example of something in the area of sports where this is rapidly changing, where things like player health and safety come to the forefront in how we're going to adapt equipment, how we're going to adapt the rules, how we're going to do, people in the sports industry be able to change the games so that they are able to continue to succeed, and also think about all the different ways that our players are going to be able to stay on the field, for example. In fact, in a study done by the Knowledge Management Institute, we found that 30% of knowledge workers' time is spent searching for the information so they can adapt to use cases like I described. And about 1/3 of the time, they're not even able to find that information. So even incremental improvements that can address a use case like that are going to have consequences, both from a revenue opportunity, because you're able to make better decisions and understand the impact of the analytics of that data, as well as cost opportunities saved by saving people time and effort in order to find the information you need in order to adapt to these growing use cases. So this leads to the question of how do you find these experts once you build them, right? How do you know who the experts are? Experts in what? Do they have enough time, these experts, to retain that skill set and account for changing and evolving technologies? And how do we prioritize what we want our teams to know and how we account for edge cases? So for example, in a genomics company where you're analyzing the human genome in order to make improvements for cures for disease, people within looking at those use cases need to understand genomic skill set, high performance computing skill set, as well as analytics and a number of other things. So it's going to be difficult for anyone to master all of those skill sets in one person. So generally, they would need a team or a network or community in order to lean upon. And so it's important to think how you would provide that access for the team so they can lean on each other. So with that said, I'm now going to pass it over to Ceci, who's going to talk about some best practices we've learned to address some of these concerns.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John. So AWS has been, like John mentioned, continuously accelerating its pace of innovation to improve entirely new technologies and invent for builders like you to transform your business. We often get questions from our customers. How do you stay up to date with all the technologies? How do you stay up to date with all the new services that we are launching? So we saw an opportunity to scale knowledge with the knowledge management best practices that I will walk you through. So there are 6 best practices that I wanted to introduce you to today. The first one is curated learning and career growth plans. So a learning path is a curated selection of assets or curated selection of training that you can organize around a particular topic or a subject area or a business problem or a use case. Often, we find builders learning in different areas, whether they want to transform themselves from developers to architects, architects to domain specialists, or traditional developers who wants to transform their skills and build generative AI capabilities. So it's always important for us to create that learning path for them. And as builders learn and make progress, so they always look for new roles and also lateral moves within the same role. It's important for them to have the career growth plan according to their career aspirations. For instance, you can create a growth plan for architects to grow into domain specialists. You can create a learning path on architectural best practices, for example, security. How do you implement security best practices within your environment and within your workloads? So once you create these learning paths and growth plans, they may become stale very quickly. So it's really important for your organization to maintain those and ensure that they're up to date and relevant. In order to do that, you need experts. So what you need to do is identify experts, which is the second best practice that I would like to share. So identify experts and their area of expertise. To implement your cloud strategy at scale, these experts play a crucial role, and they need to understand your business needs as well as your customers' needs. Based on those needs, you create a taxonomy of your products that you offer to your customers and the services you offer, and also the industries you operate in, and what are the use cases. And identify and group the experts and create cohorts into these identified set of product areas, industries, or technologies. Once you do that, they encourage them to share best practices and thought leadership around these subject areas. For instance, if you're running a media and entertainment company, and if you're running a media and entertainment applications and delivering data for the sports domain, you might want to create technology expertise around 4 areas. For example, broadcasting, content production, data science and analytics, and also AWS elemental media services. Once you identify these experts, you need to create these groups and then harvest innovation and collaboration among these experts. In order to harvest innovation and collaboration, you need to create programs such as, you can create a place where there is a forum for people to collaborate and share knowledge. For instance, it could be an organizational-specific discussion forum. It's a great mechanism that brings community and experts together to share ideas, solve problems, and then publish them for reuse. As part of that, through such collaboration, a huge amount of knowledge gets accumulated. When the knowledge gets accumulated, there is also a possibility of multiple knowledge bases and multiple teams building different knowledge systems around the organization. What you need to do is federate and organize knowledge and then create a centralized knowledge base, which will help engage your builders and also maximize collaboration. Make sure the knowledge base you're building around your cloud technologies is scalable, searchable, and reusable. Having a knowledge base is not alone because you need a community to participate and maintain that knowledge base. So the next best practice is to build a technical community. Technical community is really a focused, managed community on a specific subject area. They solve problems for their customers, for example, your customers, and develop skills of peers and other developers, and also scale knowledge. Based on the skills data you captured that I mentioned earlier around the experts and their expertise, build technical communities that are relevant and create influential teams. Based on the media and entertainment example that I mentioned earlier, you can create 4 communities around broadcasting, content production, data science and analytics, and AWS elemental media services. So these communities must be actively engaged with a specific goal and also a plan to have career growth for your developers. Eventually, that will help drive retention of your developers. So in order to drive community engagement, you need to have programs in place. Just to give an example, we have implemented gamification, leaderboards, And then badging mechanisms that are used across the board to encourage people and recognize top contributors through various programs. So now let's hear from John on how to actually build a scalable technical community and create a knowledge network.
Thanks, Essie. Now, I'd like to share some best practices that you can apply to build out your own knowledge networks based on what we've learned and leveraged at AWS. So at AWS, we call our knowledge network Technical Field Communities, or TFCs for short. Prior to TFCs, AWS employees gained expertise and engaged their peers through ad hoc and uncaptured means, which led to a number of duplicate mechanisms. TFCs provided a common community mechanism for AWS to focus efforts and understand the skills of our field. Based on prioritized learning paths paired with mentoring, we're able to give confidence for the company to understand who the experts are, so as experts then help each other and peers locally with each other's customers, with each other's needs, as well as the ability to collaborate and innovate together in order to capture the best practices of what they learn and provide those examples out to you all. So TFCs are really intentionally built, managed community mechanism. So I like to clearly differentiate that because we do take a lot of care in understanding where we want to build this, what we want to build TFCs in, and then how do we want to scale that knowledge out. And then in fact, you probably all engage with these communities and you may or may not even know it. So for example, every time your account team pulls in an expert, they're generally pulling them in from this mechanism. At reInvent, there's a number of these sessions that are presented by TFC members. You can meet them in the expo. A lot of the AWS employees are in fact part of this program. And a lot of the content that we produce and the guidance that we produce on things like solutions are created out of these communities. So to describe this a little further, I like to use a very Amazonian approach of the flywheel. And I'm going to use the example of the database TFC, which is one of our communities that we've built. So what we've done with these communities is first we built learning paths in database technologies and broke them into subdomains to provide more focused learning for experts. And then as people join into these communities, they're paired with a mentor of somebody who's already in the community that helps guide their journey and provide not only classroom style-based learning, but also experiential learning, shadowing, understanding what the other expert is doing, and really kind of getting that hands-on building that you need in order to gain that expertise. So once somebody graduates and becomes a member of this community, they then have access to the global technical field community, which includes members from across the world, across organizations, and able to gain learning opportunities as well as the ability to collaborate on a number of high-impact projects and deliverables. So when they do this, and we know that they're experts now because they graduated that learning path, they're then able to engage with customers, support their peers locally in order to help to scale out that specialist knowledge across the world. So in order to encourage people to be a part of these communities, in order to make sure that the impact of what they have built is recognized, we do a number of efforts in order to recognize the effort of those folks through dashboards, through goal alignment, through a number of other mechanisms. And therefore, because they're recognized, they get empowered, and through that collaboration, a number of things are product signal are captured. So back to that database example, which is really part of what that product signal was that we found was that there was a number of purpose-built databases and use cases that customers are using to build on AWS. In fact, we saw a need for time series databases for a number of use cases like IoT monitoring and telemetry. And so within that, that product signal was captured through TFCs and through other means, of course. And the service team was able to see that signal, build those services or those features, and then utilize the community to scale out the new product once it's launched. So therefore, this new product is launched, we need to enable new folks, People are able to go and join a new community based, or a sub-community in this case, based on time stream, which is the time series service, and therefore become experts, get mentored by those existing experts that raise that signal, and then the flywheel continues. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper on scope management. And this is generally where I like to start, because you can literally build communities around anything. So if you want to be intentional with this and you really want to get impact around what communities you build, it's critical to align what is the impact, what is the customer demand that you're trying to meet. So I'll give you 3 options that I would recommend to look into for how you can build out successful communities. So the 2 we do at AWS, we have one that are technology domains, which are aligned to the AWS service portfolio, things like AIML, compute, storage, as well as analytics and a number of the other aspects you could see in our services, as well as industry use cases like media and entertainment, healthcare, and financial services. Another area that you could all think about is your own products, your own customer segmentation, and how you may want to build communities around these aspects as well. And then where do you draw the line, right? Where are you going to invest in managed communities versus where do you want to leave to those more ad hoc mechanisms and the more virtual communities that otherwise you can have. So I also would recommend to think about limiting the number of communities, because if you have less communities, you're able to invest more resources and make them more efficient and more effective, as well as how do you bring these together in a global and cross-organizational way. So every community that we build at AWS, every TFC, is global in nature, cross-organizational. So we don't do anything that's just regionally specific. But as opposed to, we build regional chapters within the global TFCs, which we find to be much more effective because it improves that service feedback loop that I was talking about earlier. The second is inclusive processes. Knowledge communities are based on what you know, not who you are. So diverse thoughts, opinions, skill sets, and backgrounds are all a pillar of the ability to innovate. I highly recommend for you to inspect your processes once you build these type of knowledge network, and look at mechanisms regularly to align with best practices like how are you scaling out based on role? Do you build role-based learning paths? Are you calibrating the activities of what particular roles are doing? We also do elections on an annual basis, which is a best practice to make sure that we have the right people in place in leadership positions, for example, and then reporting, recognition are all a part of this. And in fact, in a study done by McKinsey, inclusive teams are over 35% more productive. So the ROI for making sure you're investing in inclusive processes is, like I said, it's a critical element of this. All right, the next is on goals and time allocation. So it's important to make sure people have time to participate in these communities. If you don't have time, it's difficult to gain the effectiveness of it, and it's also difficult to retain your skills. I'll talk about the example of an individual going through one of these, for example. Someone interested in, say, analytics. Somebody joins the analytics community, they get paired with a mentor, they get graduated, but if the organization doesn't give time for that person to retain their skill set and give back to the community, then that can lead to best intentions. It can also lead to burnout and a number of other negative aspects by them being overworked. So it's really important to make sure that they're able to do this work within their work week, because that provides the force multiplier for you and your company in order to not need as many people dedicated into technology, because people are able to help each other and support their peers. And then, of course, providing recognition through automated dashboards to align to those goals is going to be a key capability in order to succeed with this. The next best practice is on resourcing. You do need to think about resourcing. Running a well-functioning community is challenging. It's not easy. It's not free. And you need to think of 3 things when you build these things, especially if you're able to build curated set of managed communities. The first is on technical leadership or thought leadership. Understanding that you're calibrating the learning paths, the content, the expectations of your members towards the most impactful things requires people thinking about what are those most impactful things, looking at trends, identifying what is happening in the AI/ML world, for example. The second is on program management, because based on what that tech leader identifies, you're going to need program management to drive out those mechanisms. Make sure you have content systems in place. Make sure you have learning paths built up with content. Make sure you have ways for people to engage with each other. Make sure you have ways to have reporting to recognize people that are going to be spending their time in these communities. So program management is an important pillar of this. And then finally, regional leaders. And that does not need to be a full-time role, but the important thing with regional leaders is that you want to give a voice to everybody in the community. So we call these core teams at AWS, and core teams are composed of people focused on different subdomains, such as within cloud operations. We have subdomains about monitoring, cloud financial management, a number of other use cases, as well as regionally and cross-organizationally to think of all the different use cases that might be thought of in the world of, say, cloud operations. And then collaboration. Communities are meant to be fun and invigorating. Some ways to think about how to encourage collaboration in order to have fun, invigorating communities are things like monthly learning series with product teams or with partners or customers. We do this in all of our communities to make sure people are staying sharp and retaining their skill set. The ability to collaborate on high-impact projects, identifying what those projects are and having capabilities for people to sign up in order to participate in them. From across organizations, this helps with them to be able to network, meet new people, and also grow their skill set in their network. And therefore, focusing on asset maintenance when you do that is going to be an important part, so people don't just keep building, they're also retaining the assets that you've already built. We actually do an annual learning summit as well in AWS, and that has been very fruitful in terms of the ability for people to collaborate, work together, meet with service teams, meet with each other, and be able to really kind of invigorate and build that community experience. That picture you see on the screen is actually from our internal learning event. And then also external events like this. So AWS Summits or reInvent for us has been a big way for our members to be able to build the larger community with all of you. And in fact, speaking of reInvent, events like this are great use cases for TFCs. In fact, over 80% of the content is either reviewed, created, or supported by members, right? So things like workshops, Ask the Expert booths, as well as these sessions. So in fact, I'd encourage you, if you go down to the Expo Center, to ask somebody in one of those Ask the Expert booths if they're in a TFC, and which one, and they'll definitely give you some best practices about what they've learned as well, so you can hear directly from the practitioners. Another output that you may be familiar with is AWS Solutions. So AWS Solutions are really packaged solution guidance and assets around customer-based use cases we've observed through trends. So this plugs in with TFCs in a couple ways. First of all, it helps on the identification for these solutions. And then the community members are tagged to help with building out guidance and assets that will support the different solutions. So I'll give an example of autonomous vehicles. So you may go and find that. That's a combination of automotive and IoT skill set. And this is a great way to cross-collaborate and have two communities and expert groups be able to work together on a common solution, really tied to a customer use case like autonomous vehicles. And finally, let's talk a little about automation. So automation is critical to this, and we wouldn't have built up TFCs to the point where we did without it. So I would definitely recommend to think through a couple of pillars when you think about how you'd want to automate these communities. First of all is, how are you going to enable experts and how are you going to know that they have that skill set? If you don't do that, it's difficult to do anything else because you don't know who the experts are. So once you do, then how do they engage with each other? How do they engage with their peers and with customers? You need some kind of mechanism in order to do that. There are a number of mechanisms and ways to do that. AWS has built our own expert enablement system, our own engagement system, as well as content building and collaboration and the knowledge management aspect as well. So, products like repost are great ways to encourage collaboration for communities. And in order to talk a little bit more about repost and what that is, how you can utilize it, and some other AWS mechanisms you can take advantage of, I'm going to hand it over to Ceci to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks again. Yeah, thanks again, John. So as you can see, like we covered some of the best practices around knowledge management and how AWS used it to scale and how you can use it to scale your developer knowledge and cloud knowledge, and at the same time, how you can build your knowledge network. Now, AWS offers two mechanisms to really make that happen. So one is a self-service mechanism, that is AWS repost. Many of you are familiar with repost. So repost is a self-service mechanism to build your knowledge network and scale knowledge. Using repost, you can learn best practices from experts, access curated content, build your public community, and then collaborate with your peer network. Repost offers more than 20,000 question and answers that are validated by experts, and then more than 3,000 knowledge center articles in 9 different languages, curated by AWS support engineers based on the common customer problems that we are hearing. And Repost also has more than 65 community groups that you can join and participate. And these community groups are something that are tied to AWS technologies, such as analytics. Now let's look at some of the repost capabilities that you can use to build some of the best practices that I mentioned. So you might want to kind of use the self-service mechanisms like repost to create selections. Selections are a curated set of assets and learning paths, like I mentioned, as part of the first best practice. And you can create selections, your own selections on repost, and share it and consume it within your builder community and consume it within your organization. However, these are publicly available selections that other peers and other developers can also benefit from. The second aspect is, you can also create selections around your own industry and domain and share it with your organizational builders to accelerate their learning. So these are some of the examples of selections that are currently available on repost. So the second piece is Knowledge Center. We have created a Knowledge Center with more than 3,000 plus AWS official knowledge articles and videos. These are created by AWS support engineers, and they're based on common customer problems, like how do I set up and consolidate billing for my organization is one of the examples that is shared here. So these articles help improve your builder productivity in terms of troubleshooting issues and avoiding the same questions being asked again and again. So you can not only consume content, you can also create community-generated articles using AWS repost. These articles can be related to AWS technologies, but if your team would like to create articles that are specific to your workload, and but still make it public and share it with the public community, you can reach out to us. We enable access to community-generated articles to a vetted set of experts. In addition, AWS repost community members with more than 1,000 points has the ability to publish these community-generated articles. Repost also offers a Q&A mechanism where you can ask questions and collaborate and collaboratively solve problems. For example, you might have a problem that is specific to your workloads, and one of your peer might have faced a similar problem and solved it. They will be able to share that knowledge, and that knowledge can be reused across different developers. The other advantage, like I mentioned, is the community groups. There are 65 plus community groups that you can participate and join the discussion. And not only participate, but you can engage with the community by using the notifications capability. So you can follow the community groups on repost, and get notified on the capabilities. So like I mentioned, repost is public self-service capability that AWS is offering for all our customers like you. But many customers have asked us like, hey, repost is great, but we would like to build our own private community, and we would like to build our own private knowledge base. And we have consistently heard it from our customers over the past couple of years. And in order for you to do that, you need the content, community, and platform as three critical pillars. So you need a scalable platform that you can use to manage and build your community, and also create content and constantly maintain and curate it. So based on the customer feedback and what we are hearing over the past couple of years, we're excited to introduce AWS Repost Private. We launched it yesterday, and using Repost Private, you can build your own community, and you can build your own knowledge network and share knowledge within your organization. Repost Private also helps you share knowledge within and also collaborate with AWS. AWS account teams will be part of the Repost community, and they'll be helping our customers like you to solve problems. Repost Private is only available for customers with enterprise support or enterprise on-ramp support plans. Let me walk you through how you can use the Repost capabilities. And the most important aspect is you can create your own Repost instance in less than 5 minutes from your console. Select services, customer enablement, and AWS Repost Private. Click on Repost Private. You can choose free tier or pay tier. There is a free tier available for free for 6 months. And enter the name of the repost that you want to call it internally within your organization. And you can specify a subdomain specific to your domain. You can also encrypt your content using KMS keys. Repost has the ability to create support cases directly from conversations. In order for you to do that, you need to give access for Repost to access Support Center, and then click on Create Repost. It takes approximately 30 minutes for you to create this repost. And your subdomain will be reviewed by the technical account manager, and they will approve it. Until then, you can use the auto-generated subdomain. Once the repost is created, you will receive an email notification. And even though you receive an email notification, the repost is not ready yet for you to use it. You need to add users. You can add users using the repost by selecting repost, and within the users tab, you can click on add users and user groups, and select the list of users. So these users are from the IAM Identity Center. Repost is integrated with IAM Identity Center for you to link your single sign-on with Repost Private. So in order to, yeah.
Organization unit, can that be applied, like, for example, for a particular repost?
Yeah, I will help answer those questions if at the end, if you don't mind. So in order for you also need to set up the admin access to Repost. So once you set up that admin access, the admin is ready to launch the your own organizational repost. They can sign in using IAM Identity Center using single sign-on, and then once they sign in, they will be taken to a welcome screen where you can customize your brand. You can customize, for example, if you want to call it Cloud Central internally, add a description to greet your audience, and then choose your organizational logo and choose your organization branding colors. The primary color is used for the header, and the secondary color is used for the buttons within the user experience. And then once you click on Save and Continue, you will be able to also add your custom tags. So by default, Repost Private comes with AWS standard set of tags. But if you have tags that you want to customize it for your organization, specific to your products, specific to your workloads, you can add those tags. And so these are some of the example tags that we're adding. Like, for example, if you want to add Java, for example, and then generative AI, you can add those tags, and and then create them as many tags as possible. You cannot create duplicate tags. And then you can also add block terminology. Like, for example, if there are certain keywords that you don't want users to be using, by default, repost private already blocks profanity and some of the abusive terminology, but you can add other keywords. The last step before you launch a repost private is topics of interest. You can choose topics of interest for your developers. Based on the selection, a repost private will recommend a set of selections for you to consume. These are curated learning paths for your organizational developers to benefit from. For example, there are 2 selections that are populated here, and your repost private is ready for your developers to consume and use. So they can, like I mentioned, they can use all the capabilities of public repost, like asking a question and then publishing an article or create a learning path and selection. What we did is all the best practices that we shared and we learned from our customers, we have incorporated that and built this capability for you to benefit from. So try repost private today if you have enterprise support or enterprise on-ramp support plan. It's available for free for 6 months. And then after 6 months, it is priced at $12 per user per month. I'll leave a moment to scan the QR code. So what did you learn today? I mean, we shared best practices to grow cloud expertise within your organization, and how to build an expert community to scale your knowledge, and then how you can use AWS repost to publicly share knowledge and then build a public community. At the same time, I also shared how you can use AWS repost private capabilities to build your own organization-specific knowledge community. With that, in terms of next steps, so incorporate these best practices to build your own knowledge network within your organization, and then start your self-service journey on repost, and you can launch your own private repost today. With that, I would like to thank you, and we will be available in the hallway to answer any questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we'll be available there in the hallway. So thank you.